Hello, I'm Simon Whistler. You're watching Today I Found Out, and in the video today, where the idea of werewolves came from. Werewolf legends have been haunting humanity for perhaps as long as humans have been aware of wolves. It's rather difficult to pinpoint the first literary reference to what we now call werewolves, but in the Epic of Gilgamesh, written in 2100 BC in ancient Mesopotamia, this seems to be the first record that has survived to this day. In the poem, Gilgamesh refuses to become the lover of Ishtar, a goddess who has a reputation for turning men into wolves. Luckily for Gilgamesh, this fate does not befall him. 1,000 years later, the Greek historian Herodotus wrote of a tale he'd heard in his travels of people who turn into wolves for only a few days a year. Ovid's The Metamorphoses, written in 8 CE, tells a tale similar to the one of the Epic of Gilgamesh, involving a vengeful god, this time Zeus. In a nutshell, Zeus decides to pay one King Lycaon a visit, but his majesty didn't believe for a second his supposedly divine guest was the real McCoy. King Lycaon decided that feeding his visitor human flesh during a banquet held in his honor would be the best way to prove his hypothesis. If Zeus was really a god, he'd presumably see right through the ruse. It also didn't help that Lycaon attempted to kill Zeus in his sleep. Needless to say, Zeus did not take kindly to Lycaon's behavior. He turns the unfortunate king into a werewolf, figuring if Lycaon enjoyed serving and eating human meat so much, he would be better off inhabiting the body of a wolf. Pliny the Elder and Virgil also wrote about humans turning into wolves as a punishment for various crimes. The 13th century Nordic saga of the Volsungs is a story of how a father and son don wolf pelts, which turn them into wolves for 10 days. They go on a human-killing spree before the father turns on the son, nearly killing him. The son survives, thanks to a kind raven. From these ancient sources came the word's origin. It's believed that the word werewolf came around in the 5th century, derived from the Old English werewolf with a U. Essentially, before man meant male, for most of the world's history it was completely gender-neutral, equivalent to human today. The word wer or weipman was commonly used to refer to male human. Wer almost completely died out around the 1300s, but survives somewhat in words like werewolf, which literally means man-wolf. As for the creatures themselves, it's obvious that the basis for werewolves came from this ancient idea that wolves were violent creatures that had a taste for human flesh. But, well, was this perception of wolves true? Probably not, and particularly not today. While wolves are opportunistic hunters, even killing members of their own pack if they're starving and one is sick and dying, in reality, wolves rarely attack humans. However, it should be noted that this is partially a function of their massively diminished population today, and also that wolves aren't stupid, and they quickly learn that humans are a much more dangerous prey than, say, a deer or a rabbit. But even historically, it would seem that the only time that wolves typically posed a real threat to humans was during especially brutal winters when food was scarce, or if one was wandering alone in the woods in the evening or the like. Another factor is if they are sick, such as if they've been infected with rabies. In this case, they can be very aggressive, disorientated, and be seen during the day, and also lose their sense of fear. This sort of thing, combined with significantly larger numbers throughout history, is speculated what probably led to the belief that wolves desired human flesh, even though all evidence is that they prefer much easier prey when possible. In any event, the werewolf myth really kicked into gear during the latter portion of the Middle Ages. As alluded to, wolves were very common throughout Europe at the time. They were also something of a nuisance, getting into chicken coops and attacking other small livestock under the cover of darkness. From this, it should come as no surprise that wolf eventually became a derogatory term to describe those who were willing to do anything to fulfill their greed. Soon, wolves, like witches, were lumped in as products of the devil. The term lycanthropy was also coined around this time, and it refers to mystical shape-shifting, often into a wolf. Due to this, violent crimes of the day were sometimes blamed on the devil's association with wolves. For example, in the 15th and 16th centuries, several highly publicized killing sprees were blamed on so-called werewolves, or men who claimed that they had turned into wolves. To wit, Frenchmen Pierre Bergot and Michael Verdon murdered several children in medieval France. When interrogated, they claimed that it was because they had procured an ointment that transformed them into wolves. They were promptly burned at the stake. Another Frenchman, Gilles Garnier, known as the Werewolf of Dole, also claimed that an ointment turned him into a wolf, which led him to kill children and then eat them. He was also, unsurprisingly, burned at the stake. Even more famously, it was during this time when German farmer Peter Stub was accused of a series of violent murders. According to legend, he is said to have made a pact with the devil, who provided him a magic belt that transformed him into a wolf. For years, this werewolf stalked the German countryside, hunting animals and humans alike. Whether any of these crimes actually occurred, let alone if Stube was responsible, or if they were simply a product of confessions given while being tortured, isn't fully clear today. However, the aghast community responded to the horrific inhuman acts supposedly committed by Peter by committing gruesome acts of their own, such as pulling off Peter's skin in various places on his body with red-hot pincers. They also ripped off his arms and legs, smashing them after so he couldn't regain their use if he came back from the dead, and then they decapitated him. For good measure, his daughter and mistress were also brutally executed via flaying and strangling. Even though Stube was dead and gone, his high-profile gruesome story and execution ensured that werewolf legends would remain a part of the collective consciousness for some time to come. Because of this and other such stories, there are those that believe that the popularity of the idea of werewolves was actually just an attempt to explain the phenomenon of the serial killer. People simply found it easier to believe that an animal or a monster was responsible for crimes that were considered too heinous and unspeakable for any human to commit, despite, often burning those people suspected of such at the stake or flaying them alive. And given that some of the confessions, like Peter's, were extracted under torture, it's not out of the question that the suggestion that the individuals did it because they were actually werewolves was proposed to said individuals to confirm before the torture would stop. Okay, so as for how the full moon came into connection with the werewolf myth, that seems to be a relatively modern phenomenon, perhaps even first popping up as recent as the late 19th century. Unfortunately, it isn't known who first came up with this idea, but given the nocturnal nature of wolves, and that under a full moon you might be more likely to see a wolf, it's not a stretch to see how the association might have come about. It also may have been attached to the long-held notion that full moons lead to more acts of violence and unusual behavior, which may have originally been a byproduct of the fact that a full moon simply means ample light for humans to do nightly activities. If you've ever been out far away from city lights during a full moon, you've likely experienced the fact that said light is perfectly sufficient to see extremely well, even hundreds of meters away, just more or less with the world in black and white rather than color as in the daytime. Before the widespread adoption of artificial lighting, this allowed for somewhat atypical outdoor nighttime activities. Whether that's really the source of the idea or not, studies have found there's no connection between a full moon and any of these types of behaviors today. However, the endurance of the idea as a real thing may be a phenomenon of illusory correlation or confirmation bias, as in the perception of an association that does not in fact exist. That is, if one witnesses an act of violence or weird behavior and then realizes it's a full moon, said individual will draw a connection because they've heard that there already is a connection, casually ignoring all the times a full moon came and went with no such weirdness. A similar thing is likely how wolves got themselves the reputation for being bloodthirsty creatures who love eating humans. Whatever the case, unlike many other elements of modern popular mythology, it would appear that the idea of werewolves has been around pretty much as long as there have been humans writing down stories. The legend lives on to this day, albeit in a more cartoonish, less intimidating form, trending perhaps more towards the introspective anti-hero constantly battling with their dark, untamed side, or smooth-chested hunks that compete with emo, sparkly vampires for the affection of an expressionless, underage human female. Still, on dark nights when wispy clouds race over the face of the moon, it's not hard to imagine the primal fear our ancestors felt when they heard the wild howl of a wolf nearby. After all, even in our enlightened age, we all still run like mad up the stairs after shutting off the lights in the basement. And now for some bonus facts. Contrary to popular belief, popularly spread by Animal Planet in 2003, a wolf's howl does indeed echo. In fact, all sounds echo given the right environment, namely a good medium with which to reflect off of that is close enough where the sound is still audible when reflected back, and also far enough away that the echo is perceptible. Must be a delay of at least 1/10 of a second for the human brain to distinguish it from the original sound. The myth that their howls don't echo probably came about as wolves often howl in the forest. The forest doesn't provide a good medium for producing echoes, as sounds tend to get absorbed rather than reflected. In fact, it is known that wolves will use echoes to their advantage at times, often as a defense mechanism. A few wolves in a small pack will howl all at the same time, changing pitches very rapidly. This, combined with potential reverberation in the right environment, can make an enemy think that there are more of them around. On that note, during the Civil War, Ulysses S. Grant once observed this when he reported thinking there were 20 or more wolves surrounding him, only to find out that it was just 2 wolves that were in front of him that changed their pitch rapidly. The echoes coming from all around him made it seem like he was surrounded. And now for another bonus fact. It isn't known whether the dog was purposefully domesticated by humans or if they were self-domesticated, with certain of the grey wolves becoming friendly with humans from continually scavenging food scraps from around human camps. Also, similar to the domestic cat that all likely descended from just a handful of cats, it is thought that all dogs descended from just a handful of grey wolves in a small number of domestication events. In the dog's case, this probably took place in East Asia, with the dogs quickly being bred and spreading throughout the world, even to North America, around 10,000 years ago. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below and do not forget to subscribe. Brand new videos every day of the week. Also, check out some of our videos from the archive over there on the right. And as always, thank you for watching.